Hello and welcome to another Substance on Substance. I'm Phil Graham, Head of the Economic Substance Analysis for Harneys in the BVI, joined once again and for a final time this year by Josh Mangeot.
Hi everyone.
Very emotional session on the basis that it's our final podcast of the year. Thank you to everyone that has hung on in there for this season. We are hopeful of announcing an exciting new podcast series next year to go into any changes that happen in this world, but for now this will be our Festus wrap-up. There are a number of things to sort of look at that has gone on through the course of this year as a sort of look back. And I really want to start with that when we look at it, Josh. In terms of sort of headline points that you've seen develop through the year and really seen where clients have got to when they come to inquiries now. I mean, they have fundamentally changed in the type of inquiries we're getting and the type of thought process that clients are sort of going through now. And I think that's actually great to see. It's been pretty rewarding that the message is definitely out there.
Yeah, I think that's right. The timetable for this, as we've said, has been extremely aggressive, and it's largely been outside, our control as BVI lawyers, and we've tried to kind of inform the market with what's going on with this series and other announcements as much as we can. I think what we've seen is lots of clients going into it at the start of the year, coming to terms with a new rule book and trying to understand what this might mean for them. Obviously, we had the draft guidance in April and the final rules in October. And I think what I've seen during that time is certainly a growing level of conversancy with it and an acceptance that this is a new feature of the landscape for the major offshore jurisdictions. And as you say, everybody I think now is merrily getting on with it as we go into the holiday season. And the inquiries that we're seeing are much more specific. It's much more around, what do I need to be doing as people go through that exercise. As part of that, as people may be aware, we're very excited to announce version 2 of our online classification solution, which is, we think, a very great improvement on the last one. All the classifications that people have done were not affected, as we've said previously, but what we've done with it is to really build out a lot of the functionality. Phil, I don't think there's anything you want to say about that.
I'd firstly say that, just to be clear, version 1.0 was excellent, so it is improvement on excellence rather than anything else. But it's been a really interesting project, and I'd say more than anything else, what has been built out into it has been sort of our experience over the last 6 months or so in terms of FAQs. Things that keep cropping up, and we've tried to build that into the solution to allow people to get on there and use it as a resource as much as sort of an automated legal advice solution. The other thing I'd say I'm really encouraged to see is obviously the amount of people who are putting substance solutions in place. Obviously, we've spent a very boring part, probably for a number of those listeners, talking about classifying, as has been our tagline. But actually, a lot of people have now moved past that. A lot of people have got their classification in place and are now considering their substance solutions. And that's also really encouraging. People are looking at sort of holding board meetings here. People are looking at appointing local directors. People are looking at actually setting up residence here. And it's been interesting to see that. In terms of how you think sort of the market's addressing that, Josh, I mean, what's been your view on that?
Yeah, so I think the experience that I've got is that a lot of people are still in a process of finalising their classifications. I think most people at this stage have thought about it, and it's just kind of confirming that what they're doing is correct. And obviously the online solution is really helping with that. We're able to kind of go through with people in real time, in many cases, their book of business or their entities as they think this through. And then, as you say, it's really been a question of finding out how people fall out, whether they're affected at all or whether they're basically passive holding businesses, which are very simple and in most cases require no changes. And then for the more complicated ones, it's been a kind of voyage of discovery to get to know the business and to figure out, what adequate substance means for it. But in many cases, that's actually surprisingly simple to put in place, with our fiduciary team or with their selected providers. So it's heartening. There's still a lot of work to do as we go into the new year, but the direction of travel is good. And I think that the key message I've been reiterating to everybody is that, as with every kind of major area of regulatory law change, there is going to be a bedding-in period where people come to terms with the new rule book and basically discover what it means for them. And as long as people haven't disregarded it entirely, I think they're going to be in the right place.
Yeah, agree completely. And I think what's been nice by looking at our solution and some of the output we're now getting, are sort of beginning to get into the analytics, and actually a lot of these statistics we predicted in terms of who would fall outside the scope of this legislation, in terms of how many holding businesses there may or not be, in terms of how many entities are doing relevant activities, are actually playing out. And it's been very interesting to look at that. And at some point, I think next year, we'll do another podcast actually looking at some of that and looking at the numbers and trying to predict the future. I think moving on from that, if you are an entity that's absolutely avoided this so far, or indeed you're a service provider that has clients, as I'm sure you do, that have completely avoided this so far, Josh, to ask a very boring question that I think I've asked about 10 times on this series, what should you be doing? What should you be saying?
Yeah, it's the same message, but there is a hard continuing obligation now under BVI law to identify whether or not your company or other legal entity has any relevant activity, and if so, which ones. And that is an ongoing obligation now that people need to think about when they're setting up vehicles or when they're running or changing their businesses. We're very happy to help with that. There are lots of classification solutions out there. Obviously, we'd be delighted if you use ours, but that's the first step, is to think about, is that a relevant activity? If so, what type? And then everything else flows from there. And if you haven't done that already, you really should be prioritising that.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, with that said, thank you firstly to Josh for all of his fantastic input, both on this podcast and otherwise. He's been absolutely incredible for Harneys this year, and long may that continue.
Thanks.
And to end this is obviously our festive show. Josh is wearing his party hat. We are about to pull a cracker, but before we do that, we have a guest cameo from George Weston, who some of you may remember, probably not, may remember from a previous podcast. He has a festive joke to end this series, and I'll hand over to him.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. It's nice to be joining you here in this podcast, specially recorded in a manger for the Christmas special. So I've been bitter and complaining around the office that the joke that I told in the last podcast was cut out. So without further ado, Josh and Phil, do you know what economic substance and Christmas Day have in common?
I've got no idea, George.
They may both involve physical presence. And on that note...
Thanks for listening.